I would like to welcome our viewers to the first installment of Recovery Today. This is the show that focuses on all topics that are related to recovery from addiction. My name is John Winslow, and I happen to be a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't used alcohol or other drugs for over 41 years. So we know that recovery does work. The focus of our show today, and I'd also like to mention that I happen to be on the board of directors with the Recovery Resource Center in Salisbury, and also happen to be an advocate with the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence of Maryland. The focus of today's show is going to be on the Recovery Resource Center. And who better to be able to explain what the center is all about than looking through the looking glass of the executive director of Salisbury's RRC. So I would like to welcome our first guest to the show, Beth Olson. How you doing, Beth?
I'm great, John. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here today. And we would like to start by just having you introduce and tell us what is the Salisbury Recovery Resource Center.
The Recovery Resource Center is, well, we hope to make it the hub of the recovery community. We offer support for people in recovery from addiction, and there are two ways that we do that. First of all, we are home to 47 different 12-step meetings every week. We are open 365 days a year because recovery doesn't take a vacation, addiction doesn't take a vacation, and neither do we. We are open every single day. The other way that we do that is we offer workshops and other kinds of experiences to support people in recovery. And we also do a tremendous amount of outreach and education for the community at large.
Beth, because your position is so central to what happens at the RRC, can you tell us, we'd like to know a little bit more about you, and let's start with how did you happen to be in this position of executive director?
For the last 15 years of my professional life, I was an addictions counselor, which actually happened by accident, but I was an addictions counselor. And I was looking at retiring, but not wanting to just retire, not just wanting to do nothing. And a friend of mine said that the SAC Center, it was then the Salisbury Substance Abuse Community Center, the SAC Center was looking to hire an executive director, and that it was a part-time job. So for me, it was a wonderful segue from working full-time into retirement. That's the obvious reason. The less obvious reason is that I, too, am a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't had a drink or a drug in over 26 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you,
Yeah.
and to you as well. And I'm really passionate about how the stigma prevents people from getting help. And so this position offered me a platform to work to dispel the stigma associated with addiction and recovery.
For a position such as this, that people have all sorts of jobs, but with the work that is being done at the RRC, it's more than just a job. So the passion that you speak of and your own personal lived experience as a woman in long-term recovery, I'm sure is very important to serving out the mission of the RRC.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a civic responsibility in the midst of this opioid epidemic to make sure that people have correct information about addiction and recovery, and that they have correct information about who we are and what we do.
So speaking of correct information, can you tell us a little bit about what you personally have done to help move that information, that correct information, out into our community?
In the last 18 months, I have spoken to probably 1,500 students.
Wow.
I have talked to 6th graders throughout the county. I've talked to 8th graders. I've talked to 9th graders, and I addressed the Salisbury University Greek Town Hall meeting, which is 750 college students, and talked to them about signs and symptoms of addiction, because of course on college campuses, you know, binge drinking and all of that is considered normal behavior, and so it doesn't have the same there's no fear factor. And so to talk realistically about what it looks like when someone is at the beginning of an addiction and have people in the audience, you know, their eyes go wide and their faces go slack, and you can see the light bulbs go off, and they, oh no, that's me, or that's my roommate, or that's my loved one, or it's someone that I know. And they don't have that because binge drinking and using drugs recreationally is considered normal behavior on a college campus, not just our college campus, but most college campuses.
So was your presentation well received?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the young women who spoke at our recovery breakfast last year also came and was part of that presentation. And she had been in one of the sororities that had a chapter on the SU campus, and she talked about the bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood and how you treat family members and how you don't condone dangerous behavior in a family member. And you could hear a pin drop.
So she shared her story
Absolutely
with
shared her
folks.
story, yes,
Yeah,
yes. And this young woman is a recovering heroin addict with 6 years in long-term recovery. So that was very powerful for them.
From what I've learned about recovery advocacy and the efforts to address the horrendous stigma that remains out there, my understanding that one of the best ways to reduce stigma is to put a face on successful recovery. So you and she have been able to do that in a setting such as that help people to understand that somebody with an addiction is not the typical stereotype of somebody hanging in an alleyway with a needle shot up in their arm, or, you know, a drunken stumble bum, that people can and do successfully recover. So
it really is important to put a face on it. What I do with sixth graders is I ask them what they think an alcoholic or an addict looks like, and we put all of those descriptors up on the board, and then I tell them that I'm a person in recovery from alcoholism.
They don't know that beforehand.
No, I don't tell them before that. And some of them are just shocked, just shocked. And I've only ever had one child say, they look like everybody else. So it's a lot of fun to go in and dispel that stereotype.
So they get it when you are able to disclose your own recovery, and that helps them to understand it's not just somebody in for instance, a lower socioeconomic you know, environment. It can be anybody. Any size, shape, color, etc.
Yeah, equal opportunity destroyer.
Yes. Yeah. Right, so we know that about addiction, and you're also helping folks to understand that about recovery as well.
Yeah.
And that all folks can recover from this illness. And that's
Absolutely.
part of the education, to help them understand that it's not just an issue about low morals or lack of self-will, but it's an illness.
It is an illness, and it requires daily maintenance, just like diabetes does. You wouldn't not take your glipizide or your insulin or whatever if you were a diabetic, so you have to attend to your recovery.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the medicine, the treatment for addiction. Can you help us out there? And what role does the RRC play in people getting the medicine that they need to treat their illness?
Recovery works best when you have a support system. And having worked in the treatment field for a long time, I would say to people, I don't care where you get it, you just have to have one. And having that support group, the like-minded people who are living relatively happily and relatively successfully without the benefit of drugs or alcohol, are an incredible example. Because most of the world at least drinks or smokes a joint now and again, you know, and people in recovery...
Not to mention pills as well.
Yeah, and people in recovery don't have that luxury because we don't have an off switch, you know. So being around like-minded people who have lived through things that I want to do, or crises that I am experiencing, or points in my life where I'm at a crossroads and I don't know what to do, having people who have been there and done that and did it sober and are willing to share that with me helps me stay sober.
We're listening to Beth Olson, who is the Executive Director of the Recovery Resource Center in Salisbury, Maryland. This is the Recovery Today show's first edition, coming out of PAC 14, and we are so appreciative of being able to have this show. So to continue on, as you talk about the taking for people with the illness of an addiction, and we are very mindful these days about language that we use to avoid stigmatizing language. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of treatment? And I probably should use a different word now. The kinds of recovery support that is offered at the Recovery Resource Center in Salisbury. Different 12-step meetings. What is a 12-step meeting? Why don't we start with that?
Well, let's back up a little bit
Okay.
and make a distinction between treatment and recovery.
That's a good starting point, yes.
Okay, treatment is an event. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what happens in treatment is the body gets clear of the drug or the drink or whatever it is. And you get a lot of education about how to take care of yourself and not relapse.
Now, this could be in a residential setting where somebody packs their bags and could go for 14, 28 days or even longer.
Yeah.
Or it could be on an outpatient basis also,
Absolutely.
where somebody is in their home environment and they will once a week, or if it's what they call intensive outpatient, they may go 3-4 times a week. Very intensive services, but these are professional treatment services as opposed to
recovery services. Okay, so what happens is you leave treatment and you have a clean body. You know, it's free of the addictive substance or the addictive behavior, depending on what kind of treatment you need. And you come out and now you have to face the world without the armor that your drink or your drug or that your behavior gave you so that you felt safe in the world. You don't have armor. And so it's really important to be around people who are going to tell you that all the turmoil you feel, the confusion, the anxiety, that's all normal because you're getting used to a brave new world. And often people in early recovery aren't really sure how to do much of anything, because their lives have been so clouded. And even those people who go to an outpatient treatment center can have that experience. And they really don't know how to interact with people. They don't know what to do when they're happy, when they're sad, when they go to a wedding.
because they normally would
drink
use, right?
or use or engage in an addictive, destructive behavior.
Such as gambling, because you had mentioned it's not necessarily a substance in
right.
somebody's.
Right. So figuring out how to live life without being able to take the edge off is really, really challenging. And doing it daily on a day-by-day basis needs support. You need somebody to go, oh, no, 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 honey. When you go to a wedding, you don't pick up the champagne glass for the toast. You ask for ginger ale or you ask for something else. You know, those kinds of pieces of information you don't necessarily get in treatment, and that's day-to-day living.
So for somebody that's never been to a 12-step meeting, they're going to go and somebody's going to ask them to stand up and tell
Lord,
who
no.
they
No,
are
no,
and
no,
where
no,
they
no,
come
no,
from
no,
and
no,
what's
no.
your last name
No,
and
no, no.
and this is how you don't drink.
Well, there are those people, and they are everywhere. But no, that's not hopefully that's not what's going to happen in a 12-step meeting. Now, what happens in a 12-step meeting is there are typically two people at the front of a room, and one is the person who kind of runs the meeting. He or she opens the meeting and says, this is what we're going to do, and the other person leads the discussion. The meetings can be discussion-based. They can be based on literature. All fellowships have literature. It could be a question-answer format, or it could be a speaker just talking for the whole time. When people go to a 12-step meeting, no attendance is taken. We don't ask for an insurance card or an ID or anything. And we operate with first names, not last names, because of the principle of anonymity. That came about because of the shame and the stigma. 70-some years ago when it all began with Alcoholics Anonymous and Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. So nobody's going to really care that you showed up at a 12-step meeting.
Somebody going to dig into your wallet?
No, no, it's free. Everything we do at the Recovery Resource Center is free.
So how is that possible? Shifting a little bit away from what happens at a 12-step meeting to the mission of the Recovery Resource Center and how it operates, how does it happen if everything's free?
The groups there are 47 meetings every week, and those groups pay rent. And the way that they do that is they pass the basket at sometime in the meeting to pay for literature, coffee, whatever expenses the group has, and then the center requests a percentage of that basket as rent.
Okay, so I understand that there are no dues or fees, but
Right.
people can make voluntary contributions, and so that goes towards helping support the overhead for the RCC or RRC's operations, overall operations.
Well,
now,
it's only about 10% of the budget.
so where's the rest of the money come from?
We have corporate sponsors that provide us about 60% of the budget. United Way is our biggest supporter and has been for a number of years. But we also get support from other foundations locally. We don't
So we do rely on the community to help
absolutely
support
we
the
do
operations.
not get any public dollars, though. We do not have any taxpayer money in our budget at this time. So we have these foundations and organizations that are supporting us with 70% of our budget. The basket from the groups is about 10%, and then the other 20% is raised through efforts of the board and the staff.
It's really fabulous to hear of the community's involvement in supporting the operations of our Recovery Resource Center. In terms of community support, community involvement, one of the significant ways I understand that the RRC has been involved in our community and addressing the concerns of addiction is the role that you personally played in and the RC has played in, and some of its board members, with the mayor's task force. Can you tell a little bit about the START
task force?
Yes, can you tell us a little bit about that and the recommendations that have come out of that?
Okay. The START task force, it stands for Substance Treatment and Addiction Reduction Task Force.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I chaired that. It was Mayor Jake Day's brainchild. He wanted to know what the city, what his office, the city, and the city council could do to address this epidemic. And basically, when he sent the letters out inviting people to participate, he said, I know nothing. So I'm not the person to figure out what to do. So there were people from treatment agencies, nonprofits, hospital, and now I'm drawing a blank. But there were, concerned people coming together from all different.
Some groups that have lost loved ones from addiction.
Caring and sharing in the face of addiction, they were part of it. And our job was to figure out what we had, what was in process, what specifically the mayor and the city could do, and what we could do as concerned citizens, as a group of concerned citizens. So we had a recommendation for the mayor and the city council, things to advocate for, lobby for.
And there's some exciting events that are in the works that are as a result of that. Speaking of, and those, we will make some announcements as time goes on in relation to that. Before we end up wrapping up our program today, and speaking of exciting events, can you tell us a little bit about one of the things is September and the September event that is significant to the RRC?
Yes, it is our third annual Lighting Up Recovery Breakfast. It will be September 28th at Dove Point at 7 o'clock in the morning. Tickets are $25 a piece.
Coffee's going to be available.
Coffee is available, yes, and
So.
we have a band, Such Fools, which is
Great music.
They're great musicians. They will be there rocking and rolling so it feels like a party, not, oh my God, it's dark 30 and I have to be up and presentable.
So we're going to be putting announcements out to that
Yes.
wonderful event. It's a fundraising event, so
is
we
a
hope that we
fundraising
get a
event.
great turnout, 200 plus people.
We hope, yeah.
We hope. So finally, and on a real personal note here, you've been involved in a personal project that is has been a dream child of yours, and it's now come to fruition. Can you tell us about that? You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. I have a book that's coming out in September, and the book is called Distilling Hope, and it is Recovery's 12 Steps in 12 Stories. And so the book is an anthology of traditional folk tales and fairy tales because they're wonderful stories, and they teach, as they always have taught. And what I did in addition to put the stories together was I wrote an essay about how each story connects to a particular step, and then there are suggestions for a deeper personal connection to the step in the story, suggestions that a clinician or a teacher or a clergyman could use in therapeutic or educational settings. And because I wanted the stories to be used, we have recorded all 12 stories. And so there will be a 2 CD set of all 12 stories so that anybody who wants to use them can.
Another creative way of carrying the message of recovery out to folks. And so I want to thank our guest, Beth Olson, Executive Director of the RRC in Salisbury, for coming on and being our guest for our very first show of Recovery Today through PAC 14. I would like to invite our viewers to tune in to our next show, which is scheduled to be taped on August 10th. We're going to have a guest, Tom Hill, who's with the National Council on Behavioral Health, Vice President there with Addiction and Recovery Services. I would also like to inform our viewers that help is available through the RRC. The phone number is going to be put up on your screen, 410-749-9482. And I would like to thank you once more, Beth, for coming in and appearing as our very first guest on Recovery Today, and thank our audience for viewing.